Oh yes, dear listener, whoever you may be, we are in the midst of the COVID-19 outbreak, so the future is uncertain. But for where I am, I've basically decided, well, I'm not. I can coast for a bit. I have that luxury. So if we're being encouraged to social distance, then I'm going to use this opportunity.
I hate that term, social distancing. I'm going to go on a rant for a second. Social distancing is just a euphemism for quarantine. Like, fuck off with that shit. Like, anyone who's like, oh, I'm social distancing. Like, no, you're not. Social distancing is what somebody does when they're depressed. Like, let's be clear about that. If you've got a friend who's social distancing, you should be worried because you're like, oh, that person normally isn't this socially distant. I need to check in on them. When we use social distancing in this way, it becomes like that's just a polite way of saying, like, you're in fucking quarantine, like, stop pussyfooting. Fuck. Welcome. You are entering into a strange dimension. A dimension where narratives from across space and time come together. Narratives that could have, might have, or should have been all exist here in one space. This is CineCasters Ultimate Timeline. Welcome back to CineCasters. This is a show where we watch a terrible movie, terrible movie, and then pitch it back to each other. And by each other, I mean myself, Andrew DeYoung, the Janglez, and Nathaniel Draper.
Hello, that is I. Hi.
That is I, yeah.
Yes.
And today we are talking about Tarzan, the 2016 Legend of Tarzan, directed by David Yates, which when I found out, I was so surprised that it was David Yates. And what an all-star cast, like Margot Robbie, what's-his-face Skarsgård, Samuel L. Jackson, that one guy from all of the Quentin Tarantino
Christoph
movies.
Waltz. Oh, yeah. Samuel L. Jackson.
And Samuel L. Jackson, both of them, yeah. Yeah, and even I can't remember the actor's name. The actor who plays the tribal chieftain. He's also a very famous actor.
He's also in another movie we talked about, King Arthur.
Oh yeah, we haven't done that one yet, but we will talk about it. Yeah. So I guess first things first. I'm gonna ask the question that's on everyone's mind, which is, how racist is this movie?
Oh.
On a scale of 1 to apartheid.
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that.
Yeah. And like the worst part is it's not even like overtly racist, it's just like accidentally racist.
Yeah, I get I kind of get that impression that they weren't trying to be, but yeah, there was a few points where I was watching it and I went, okay, well,
and let's be clear, like the movie is about race and slavery.
Well, that's why it's so elusive.
Yeah, but I think, and the movie itself, like, what I mean by that is, like, the movie isn't trying to be racist. Like, it isn't like American History X, which deals with like prejudice in the theme of the movie. Like, this deals with in the theme of the movie, but it's not like, it's like all of our main characters are trying not to be racist, except for the ones that are supposed to be. But like the movie itself comes across as like white savior, kind of a little bit super racist.
Yeah, I think part of it is because, I think what's contributing to that is all the characters kind of hit one note. All of them hit one note.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately does reinforce that idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so just go into it. What are your thoughts on the movie?
Just in general?
Yeah, like what would, like, I don't know. We usually at the beginning go into like, what are your thoughts? Like any nitpicks or anything like that.
Yeah. Oh, I have the Google Documents. There we go. I should have brought this up before. I'm going to narrate again. I'm using my finger to hit my iPad to bring up the Google Documents with my notes. Here we are. What worked? Okay. So, I usually break it down into things I thought that worked and things that I thought that didn't work. So, things that I thought that worked. I thought the theme of colonialism was an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah, definitely.
It was sort of like they planted that seed and then
did nothing with it.
Really, but I was like, I remember at the beginning of the movie when the text comes up going, oh, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah, I like that they decided on like a specific time.
Yeah, I like that too.
Like instead of being like, oh, this is ambiguous, British colonial Africa. It was like I've read the book. I have read the book, by the way. I own it.
Which one?
Somewhere on my shelf. The original Edgar Rice Burroughs, like Tarzan.
Oh, okay, because I understand there's like 19 in that series or something like that. There's a
I've read the first one.
Oh, cool.
And I can't remember if they ever actually like name a location. It's been a couple of years now. I can't remember if they ever name a specific location, but I like that they were like, no, it's this. We're doing it at this time, and we're doing it at in this place.
Okay,
like it's in the Congo. And so I did like that, and I liked that they were like, oh, let's take a chunk out of colonialism and see how that really interacts with Tarzan.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing, in terms of an idea. Right at the beginning, you're going, oh, okay, this is, it was neat to have it grounded in a place, but it didn't really, beyond that, it didn't really go anywhere. Despite the characters being flat, I actually thought some of the performances were not bad. Specifically, Christoph Waltz and Sam Jackson. I felt like they kind of did...
Sam Jackson, I think, carries this movie.
Yeah, I felt like they did the best with what they had. It looked great. Like, it looked amazing.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to say. All the set
really
pieces,
good.
like all the set pieces, all the action, they all work.
Mm-hmm.
But we know David Yates is a good director.
Yeah, I mean...
Or at least a decent one. I mean, he did a great job with Half-Blood Prince and with... Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2.
Or as I like to call it, Harry Potter Goes Camping.
Yeah. That's what it is.
Yeah. Exactly. There was one scene where I went, oh, okay, this is now not as bad. There's the scene where Jane actually, like, breaks out of captivity and frees her friend. I went, that was the scene where I was like, oh, okay, that's
dope.
It's way more interesting to have a character who actually does something.
But then, like, immediately afterwards, we'd never see the character who escaped.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah,
we don't see him again.
It's so funny. I didn't even realize.
And then Jane immediately gets recaptured.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, under the circumstances she gets recaptured really pisses me off, because like she's like, oh well, I'm gonna like expose my parts to like these gorillas so they don't attack me, but then when Rom comes up to like get her, he doesn't expose his parts and they don't attack
I didn't get that
it's either. Just like, how come he's allowed to like come and get her? Like, I don't know. I realized what they were going for was like a don't hurt the gorillas kind of thing, but it was like, fuck you.
It
like,
didn't work.
This is so irritating, because I was like, why aren't they attacking him?
Yeah, it just didn't work.
It didn't work at all.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I thought was interesting was starting it off with Tarzan being in, I'm assuming it's London at the beginning. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting way, because we, going into it, are expecting it all to take place in the jungle, and to have it go like, oh, this is afterwards. Oh, that's interesting. I thought starting off that way was an interesting idea.
I think I like it too, because this is sort of set up like it doesn't matter which version of Tarzan you saw first. Mm-hmm. And even if it was the Disney one, like really any of them could be expected to be the sequel. Or sorry, this could be a sequel to that, because you understand the story. He grew up as a child, had met Jane, whatever, it doesn't really matter. So you understand the nuances, or at least the general background of Tarzan, so we're not doing an origin story.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I thought worked, because origin stories get bogged down by their own business.
Yeah. Well, so on that, I'll get into what I think. Those were the things I had for what I thought was going for it. Interestingly, I have a shorter list of things that didn't work, but I think they're actually really, really big problems. The first one was... one was the flashbacks. I felt like they were completely unnecessary, or just the way in which they were structured into the movie just felt really contrived and forced, and I felt like it gave the audience way too much. It left, because I think what was interesting, what they had going for them at the beginning was a bit of mystery around, oh, okay, so he's Tarzan. I think people have enough of an understanding of the character to already be asking questions about that. And then the flashbacks just sort of, to me, just removed all the mystery. that was
they
really
like disambiguate the mystery.
Yeah, exactly. Which I felt was a big mistake. Like because after that I went like, well, okay, now you've just I get it now. I'm not interested anymore, frankly, because I have nothing I need to figure out. There's no mystery for me. The other big problem, for me, the biggest problem with the movie was just the character of Tarzan. He had no personality. Nothing was complicated about him. No inner conflict. It was just a flat, one-note character. No transformation. Almost like he just had it two together. And I felt like that was a big shortcoming in the movie, was that this character, there was no growth, really. He starts off...
Well, there was no nothing.
Exactly.
He's just Tarzan.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, okay. Like, I think I do think that there was a version of this movie where, like, because it seems to me like he has this whole thing about his name, where he's like, "Oh, I'm not Tarzan. My name is John Clayton, Lord of Greystoke." Right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, "Oh, okay. So there's like something about naming is supposed to be like a theme, like his name." Because later on, he says like, "No, I'm Tarzan." Right. Tarzan of the Apes or whatever they call him. And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." But then they don't do anything with it. Like, I feel like there was a draft written where that was super important. Like, the reason they were in London was like, I do feel like there was a previous version of the script that was more concise about that.
I did wonder, watching it, I did get what I call studio note vibes, studio note syndrome. This is the term that I've used to coin. We handed a movie off to the studio that financed the movie, and then they had their turn giving us notes and look at what the
You mean on the script?
The script or the edit or anything.
Oh, even the edit, even that far into development?
This might be my experience working in editorial for, I won't say which network, but they may also make Christmas cards. That
never gets old to me.
You'll sometimes
we always say we'll never mention them, but they do make Christmas cards.
They do make Christmas cards, anyway, at the end of the process, you send them the edit of the movie, and they send you notes back. And I mean, the movie's bad to begin with, but they just make it worse. So there's
because it's homogenized. Anyway, sorry, go on.
So I don't know. So I've developed a sensitivity to what I call a studio note syndrome, which is my own idea of like, well, it's this. I just blame the studios and the networks for everything.
It's true, because I mean, you do see movies come back where you're like, oh, I see what they were going for here, but it feels like somebody had an idea that they thought was clever, but it really wasn't. Like,
well, that's why I wonder in this case, because I mean, David Yates has made some good movies, so whenever something like this happens, I go, there may have been something else going on, and their hands were tied, and they went, well, my contract said this is a big thing among film directors. Directors will fight to get final cut for their movie, which means they get to be the final sign off on like, this is the edit. But that doesn't always happen, especially with big budget movies. And
I actually wonder, because I was thinking like with David Yates, we know that he's written some really good movies, but we also know the most recent Fantastic Beasts movie was critically panned.
I haven't seen it, so I can't say actually.
Oh, we should definitely do a CineMasters episode on that, because it is a movie that would be really great for CineMasters, because it's like there's so much going on. I mean, I know we're not doing it right now, but I'll just as a tangent. When I first saw it, I left the movie theater going, "What?" And then immediately my thoughts when I left the theater were, that should have been a book.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
There's so much going on, and it's so poorly told as a visual medium that, like, when I think about it, I'm like, oh no, it makes a lot of sense narratively, but in the visual medium, it's so busy and so messy.
Interesting.
Yeah. So my initial thought was like, I would have read the fuck out of that. And so the reason I brought it up is because David Yates, so I think the problem is exactly what you're saying, when he is left to his own devices to simply just, tell a story using a movie, we get stuff like The Deathly Hallows. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? We get stuff like The Half-Blood Prince, which in my opinion is the best Harry Potter film. I know you like 3, but I think The Half-Blood Prince is the most like funny. It just feels like the most cohesive narratively as a movie. All the characters feel like they're in their own, and we get a bit more character interplay as opposed to just plot. From the Harry Potter cast anyway, or Harry Potter movies. But I think those movies are great. And then I wonder actually how much of this is just like, he's a great director who's easy to work with. Like, that's the way the studio thinks. Like, the studio is basically like, he's a great director who does a great job on big films. Like, he delivers exactly what we want, and he's easy to work with in terms of like, if we want to make changes, he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Yeah, sometimes I've heard of directors who that's the kind of the trade-off they have to make if they want to make. There's this idea among, at least I've heard among the filmmakers, like you do one for them, you do one for yourself. So I've heard that as well.
Yeah, so exactly. It's a thing that's been widely discussed. So I mean, who knows?
And it's very lucky. You're very lucky if you wind up getting into the industry. Like, I'm thinking of the director who did The Witch.
Oh yes,
2015's The Witch.
Yes.
Because he recently just did
Lighthouse.
Lighthouse, yeah. And so, like, he has, 2 movies under his belt?
Yeah.
Like, 2 big movies. But I think horror is a bit different, because when you do horror, it's always going to be a little experimental. And then when you wind up with something like The Witch, which wind up being, not a hit in terms of, like, hit, but, like, it was a sleeper hit. Mm-hmm. Like, people still talk about it. And so you wind up with, like, it was like, oh, you get to do something like that, and then you go to The Lighthouse, which is, people are talking about that, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
those guys are always the ones who are the most interesting to me, because they have been able.
I'm thinking like Nolan too. Christopher Nolan gets to do these big action budget films, but still, like, I mean, if Christopher Nolan went to a studio and was like, "I'm going to do this," and they didn't know it was Christopher Nolan, how many of them would greenlight that?
Well, that's the thing. He's been able to find himself in a very, very lucky position where he's able to do that. I've heard stories of even guys like, Steven Spielberg said that when he went to go make Lincoln, he had a hard time getting Lincoln financed.
Really?
Yeah. So, and then you didn't think of it with Martin Scorsese with The Irishman. Had a really hard time getting the money together to get that movie made. It wasn't until Netflix came in that they were able to make that movie.
Which is interesting, because we're talking about, like, the godfather of cinema.
Yeah, I mean,
sort of going back and doing what he does best. Like, he's like, we're going to go back and do classic Scorsese.
Mm-hmm. Well,
with these huge names.
Yeah, exactly. You would think on paper, you would think that just looking at it, you'd go, oh, this makes sense. But had a hard time, even with Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, and himself.
Joe Pesci!
Yeah, had a hard time getting the funds together to get that movie made. So, that is actually just the reality of the, filmmaking. Everybody says that they have a hard time getting films financed. Yeah. Everybody. So yeah.
Well, I mean that's why I think, like, CineMasters does exist, is so we can go, hey, like, I think there is a good movie here. We just got to pull it out.
Yeah, I think so.
Got to parse it out. But I mean, you even said, you're like, this is almost the perfect CineMasters movie.
Yeah, because I felt like I felt like there was enough.
I believe your exact words were, "Oh man, what a piece of shit."
Oh yes,
this is the
those
perfect
were my exact
CineMasters
words. Yes,
movie.
I didn't elaborate on it in message, but yes, I will elaborate on it now. I think there is.
Yeah, I want to hear about it. Hit me with your pitch.
Sure. Well, I didn't get to hear your thoughts. Well, the only other thing I was going to say that didn't work, I did not like the action sequences. I thought they were dumb.
Okay.
And there was a bit in the beginning. I was like, okay, maybe this is okay. Maybe this is okay. Maybe this isn't bad. It was when he gets to Africa, and he sees the lions, and he
nuzzles the lions.
As soon as that happened, I went, no. This is...
You can tell it's a green screen too.
Yeah, it's not even just I just thought everything about that. I went. I just left me scratching my head, and I went, this movie lost me. This is like
that was the moment the movie lost you. That's interesting, because it actually happened earlier in the movie for me.
Oh, okay, interesting. What was it for you?
So I'll talk about first what I liked. I actually thought, like, some of the the set pieces, like the big set pieces, were well done. Like the boats exploding, and like it feels like a fun movie. You're like, I can see why this would be a fun movie.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't, but I can see why it would be. The wildebeest stampede destroying the house. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen stampeding creatures, but like even when creatures panic and they stampede, they like avoid things.
Right. Oh, interesting.
Like they're smart about it. Like, you know, the whole thing, like a bull in a china shop. There's a Mythbusters episode where they actually show like a bull in a china shop, and they're quite careful.
Oh wow, that's so interesting.
Now it's not stampeding, but like a building wouldn't collapse because wildebeests are running through it. Like, fuck. Like,
You're referring to the end of the movie when they charge on?
Yeah, that very end scene. I was like, oh, come on.
That was stupid.
Yeah. Anyway, the point for me that lost me in this movie was when the kids show up. Well, like Jane is like teaching, and she's like it basically like shows her with children because they're trying to do like, I don't know if they were trying to do like some kind of character development with her having a miscarriage and then having a baby at the end, but that was totally not part of the theme. It happens at the beginning and at the end.
Oh, right.
Like, other than that, it's not dealt with. So there was definitely like a rewritten thing there.
Right.
Because that was horribly dealt with. But more like when she's with all the children teaching, and you're just like, oh, this is basically just a trope because we're like, people who are good with children are good people. It's like, it's Jane. We already know who she is. Right. We don't need this kind of introduction.
Exactly.
But then right after that scene, the kids all show up with Tarzan, and they're like, oh man, it's Tarzan, it's Tarzan. Like, is it true you can walk on all fours? And like you were raised by gorillas or whatever, and he like gets down on the ground and he's like, yeah, I grew up walking on all fours, and it like shows his hand, and he's like, it changed the bone structure, and his hand like swells out, and I was like, what? Like, excuse me, that's not how bone structure works. Like, if you walked like that, you'd ruin your hands. You'd literally have like like you'd ruin your knuckles. You wouldn't be able to function like a normal human being. Like, just the bone structure changed. Like,
yeah. I actually,
that part lost me.
I groaned at that too.
And like it clearly like makes his hand look animated. Or whatnot.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was like, why? You don't need that. Just stop.
Yeah.
Like, the movie doesn't benefit from that.
No, I agree.
The last thing that I will say is this movie is really, like, the story is Tarzan. Like, the plot is about Tarzan, but the actual story is about colonialism in Africa and slavery. And I did do some research, and Samuel L. Jackson's character, who, by the way, Samuel L. Jackson makes this movie for me. This movie almost, if you got rid of Tarzan and told that the story is from Samuel L. Jackson's perspective, I'd be okay with that, because it's a true story.
Oh, interesting.
Dr. George Washington Williams was an African-American who worked in the Civil War, was a pastor and a lawyer and a journalist, and then came over to Europe, was very fascinated by Leopold, the Belgian king, and he was responsible. That letter that they show in the end about slavery and the way that the king's agents are dealing with the Congolese people, that letter is actually historically true. That happened.
Right.
So, to me, it was like, why are we...
Interesting.
Yeah, but this is where we get into my biggest problem is, so the story is about Congolese people. If they're fantasized a little bit, that's fine. Congolese people in the Congo with, like, Dr. George Washington Williams' story about the Congolese people, and our three main characters are white.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Right? So Tarzan, Jane, and Rom, all three of our main characters are white. Now, you could argue that all this happens... The circumstances all happen to Tarzan and the characters because of African American characters, particularly the war chief Mbonga. He is the one who like wants Tarzan to be there. So there is an inciting incident that he tries to get Tarzan there, and then the reason Tarzan comes to Africa is because George Washington Williams is basically like, oh, I can make it happen. So, like, there is an argument to be made there, but it's like you're telling a story of African-American people using three white people. And that is the biggest problem to me about this movie.
That is actually a really good observation, and you're right. And I'll admit I don't think I actually was able to address that in my pitch because that occurred to me as well. But yeah, okay, that's interesting that you'd bring that up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to hear your pitch now.
Okay, cool. So I tried to, with this one, I actually did try to, I tried to give Tarzan an arc in mine. I tried to stick with, and it became less about, I mean, the theme of colonialism does come up. Mine could almost be read as a sequel to the Disney movie, because as I was watching this one, I was like, man, if I was just pitch Tarzan, it'd probably be like the Disney one. Like, all it's missing is just some Phil Colins, and then, you know. Yeah,
oh man, all it's missing is Phil Collins.
All this movie needs, exactly, all this movie needs is Phil Collins and a story. In my version,
a good fucking movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, actually, no, I take that back. My version would be a musical. And the music would be done by Phil Colins and Peter Gabriel.
Oh, like working together.
Yes, but not Genesis, just Phil Colins and Peter Gabriel.
Oh, I don't know how I feel about that.
No, fuck it. Genesis, they do the music.
Yes! Day made.
Yeah. Selling Congo by the pound. Sorry. That was a really bad joke. I apologize.
It's okay. I got it. It was funny. Not really, but...
Okay, so in my version, it starts off with him in England, but he's having a hard time adjusting to life in England. So it's Tarzan and Jane have moved to England, and she's there for work, and it's implied that he has moved there to live there and is sort of accommodating her and is trying to make her happy, but he's having a really hard time adjusting because he's finding that just the he's overly stimulated by this city environment. It's not what he's used to. So, and he misses the jungle, and he wants to go back. And so there's this notion of there was this scene I had an idea where they're basically talking, and she says just give it time and you'll get used to it. I admit it's overwhelming, but you'll get used to it as you live here more. And he goes, yeah, but it's not who I am. It's not I mean, yes, I maybe biologically this is where my roots are, but I grew up in the jungle, and so this is how I have been trained to think. So I was playing with this idea of nature versus nurture, and and then he meets somebody else who is working on behalf of the crown, and this person says, and in my version they were going to be played by Samuel L. Jackson. I just thought I'd take that character. And he says that I'm working on behalf of the crown, and they want to send a team of explorers into the jungle because we have heard that King Leopold is now... There actually was a period in Congo history where King Leopold basically took over the Congo, and it resulted in deaths of thousands of people. And so Samuel L. Jackson says, we're going on basically what's a secret mission, and we're going to go and basically go really deep into the jungle, and I need someone to go with me as a guide, and we want to go and basically scope out the situation and just see for ourselves and bring back information to the crown to see what's going on, and hopefully build some ties with some of the locals there. And he says, I need someone who can go with me, and I've heard that you are very familiar. And in my version, the whole Legend of Tarzan thing isn't really a thing. He's just he's gotten a reputation as being someone who maybe grew up in really harsh environment but knows the jungle. So he's heard about Tarzan, and Tarzan wanting to go is yes, this is my ticket, and he accepts. But he doesn't tell Jane, and what he tells Jane is that he's actually going on a part of he's going to do an anthropological study of some sort in France, and he'll be away for a while. She is suspicious, but she's like, that's okay. Go ahead, and I'll see you when you get back. So he goes off to Africa, and what he wants to do, we know as the audience that he wants to go in and find his family, which would be the gorillas in the jungle that raised him. Anyway, as he's then you have a sequence of him and Samuel L. Jackson going through the jungle, and Tarzan actually finds his family, but they don't accept him because he left them and they've outcast him. And in his attempt to try and win their favor, they almost kill Samuel L. Jackson, so he has to rescue him, and then that's when he explains to Samuel L. Jackson, like, this is what happened to me when I was younger. This is, and that's how you fill in the story.
This is the real legend of Tarzan.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what happened. And anyway, later he actually goes back on his own and tries to win their favor, and is able to win their favor this time. And he's actually, and basically he, at this point in the story, he starts actually slowly transitioning to his old life and being comfortable with it again. Anyway, in the meantime, Jane has discovered that he lied to her, and is actually...
You're not in France?
Yeah, exactly. And she's actually worried that he's gone and he's actually not coming back. And is also has heard about the situation in what's going on with King Leopold and the Congo, and so is like, I just have to go and see what's going on. So she goes, she gets on a boat, and she travels, and when she gets there, she finds Tarzan. She sees that Tarzan is sort of gone back to the life that he had before, but she falls in love with the jungle again and likes being there, and they spend some time together. And meanwhile, they're
like gratuitous boning, like in the original movie.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, all of that. And
ooh, a blue-footed booby. They didn't call. Who gives a fuck?
I know that was. Yeah, maybe not that part. But anyway, they as time progresses, she starts to miss being back in London, and she starts to wonder whether he actually does want to go back. And so she asks him point blank, like, hey, one day we are going to go back, right? Like, you're just here on this diplomatic mission, so to speak, right? And he says, no, actually, I think this is my home. I think this is actually where I belong. And these are the people who, this is my family. And she's upset by this, and is processing it. And in the midst of processing it, figures out that Samuel L. Jackson has lied to all of them, and it is actually a mission to go and find these mines really deep in the jungle on behalf of the crown, and to try and get there before the Belgians can. And so she's then going to go and warn Tarzan, but before she can, all of these we'll call them the colonialists go in and kidnap Tarzan, capture some of the apes, and start just deforesting the
force
jungle.
publique.
Yeah, exactly. The force publique. They go, capture Tarzan, start deforesting the forest, and are like, and Samuel L. Jackson, I wanted to give the antagonist in this a chance to be like, I don't agree, like, and to say, I had a line where he says, it's in man's nature to conquer. This is just what we do, and it's kill or be killed. And I have to do that. Like, do you think I'm enjoying doing this? No, I have to do this. Someone else is going to do it. I'm at least going to do it. I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to kill your family. But this is what I have been asked to do, and this is just the way the world is. And it's how he's able to sort of rationalize his own way of doing things. Anyway, in my version, Jane actually rescues him, and together she rescues Tarzan, and then he actually has to go to the other tribe where he killed the leader's son, and he basically goes and begs for forgiveness and says, like, look, I need your help now because these people are here and they're going to just take the jungle and we have to fight them. And then in my version, he basically goes to this tribe and gets them to help, and then they actually go rescue his family and then fight off the bad guys, and they win. That's the end of the movie.
Yay.
I haven't found a conclusion in mind in terms of like, do they go back to England? Do they stay here?
Well, so here's the thing. My first issue is Tarzan still John Clayton, Lord of Greystokes? Because that's actually canon. That is actually in the book.
So yeah, I mean, I was gonna stick with that. Yeah, in mind.
Yeah, well, because then England makes sense. Because the only reason I was asking is because Jane is an American.
Right, I did read that.
So I wondered if like if London actually made sense. Like maybe. Because if there's nothing, why London? Like, if there's nothing holding him there, he's the one who has the title and the fortune.
Right. Well, that's a fair point. Yeah, I guess in my version, she was British, and that's why they were there, or she was there.
That's fine. You can do that.
Yeah. But
I just wanted to be clear because, like, that
was one detail I didn't get the chance to figure out for sure.
Yeah.
But I thought of putting them in London because then they could be working on behalf of the British crown. And then that would also just
also like Edgar Rice Burroughs was British, and it's written in like a very British colonialist sense. Like it feels like when they wrote the original pitch, they were like, "Oh, how do we like reconcile this like piece of colonialist, very racist and sexist writing?" Mm-hmm. And like we'll make it into a good movie, and they did do a very good job.
Yeah, and so I just stuck with London to try and keep with that theme.
Yeah.
So yeah. The bit of research actually that I mentioned before, we messaged a bit before we started recording this. A bit of research I was going to do was specific to the Congo, and there was actually a figure. There was a real person in history who, and I'm not sure if this was supposed to be Christoph Waltz's character, but he actually was building a railway through the Congo and worked on behalf
Monsieur Ram or whatever his name was.
Yeah, but he's the guy who said the words Dr. Livingston, I presume, in real life supposedly.
Yeah.
But I'm curious and this guy was working as an agent on behalf of Leopold.
Oh, he probably was supposed to be that character.
So that was the bit of research that I wanted to do. And basically in my version, the Christoph Waltz character doesn't really show up. There's no deal made with the tribe to lure Tarzan there. In my version, I tried to make it,
because that's like that's one of the weakest points. Like,
yeah, it was really arbitrary.
I also thought that the whole conflict that happens between Tarzan and the tribe leader, when he's like, "You didn't have any honor," and he's like, "You're right, I didn't have any honor," and I was like, "You didn't?" What do you mean?
Yeah, it's not really addressed.
You killed his mom, and then he killed your son, and it's like I feel like you could have done a vengeance theme there easily.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing.
Where it's like so like he's like, how was he supposed to know it was your mom? Well, you are killing gorillas, so like it's gonna be somebody's mom. So then like the gorillas obviously kill others. So like I don't know. It just seems so arbitrary that he's like, oh, like, you know, why do you want to kill Tarzan just because he killed your boy? Like I get that. That's crazy. But also like you did kill his mom, and you probably killed other gorillas because it's implied that that's used as a rite of passage.
Yeah, I don't know.
That was weak.
It was. And so in mine, what I tried to focus on was giving Tarzan more of an arc, and thematically that question of nature versus nurture, and having that be at the heart of the conflict for Tarzan, being like, okay, because it's like, I think about being someone who grew up in the jungle and then going and having to adjust to life in a city, how hard that would be. And then I thought about this, because you're right. I almost thought, like, what if the whole thing was just Tarzan in London? Well, see, that was another possibility too, but I felt like my thinking was, if you were to do a big movie as Tarzan, a standalone movie of Tarzan, it would be expected, the audience would be expecting for you to go to a jungle at some point. And I feel like
maybe he just moves into the zoo.
yeah, there you go. If I wanted to give him, I felt like what was really missing in the movie was some inner conflict for him, and so that was what I tried to do with this, was basically to have him go wrestle with this whole identity thing, and going back and saying, okay, but this is the notion of family, and then also, and then the thing I didn't, in when I explained my pitch, that didn't really come across, part of the reason he was outcast to begin with was because when Jane showed up, there was actually some exploitation on the part of some of the people who came with her. And when he started befriending them, his family took that personally, and he actually at a certain point did make a choice to go with her and not to be with them. And
so like when he comes back, he has to do some kind of reconciliation.
Exactly. He has to win their favor again. And then he does, but then in winning their favor, he ends up inadvertently bringing this thing back again. But this time,
that's interesting.
What he's able to do is he's actually able to, with the help of Jane, to actually stop it and correct it this time.
Yeah, I like that.
So that
I like that. Also, it's like inadvertently her fault.
Right. Yeah.
Like she's not to blame really, but she's like intrinsically connected to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that when she finally because you could play with that a little bit, almost have it be like, oh well, Jane is pseudo responsible, not directly but indirectly responsible, which means that like she has to come to terms with the fact that like, oh, I'm a part of this.
Exactly.
So if this is going to get fixed, like I have to help fix it.
Exactly. And that's one of the points the antagonist that he brings up, like you're criticizing me, but you live in a society, like everything that we have actually at some point was built on the backs of slaves. Yeah. And so who are you to criticize me? You are all complicit in this.
Yeah. You could even have her like grow up wealthy, privileged in Africa with actual like servants, African American servants, and just be like, oh, like
there you go.
Like you grew up that way. Your education, was built on servants. So sure, like maybe your professor dad was all high and mighty and was like, yes, we employ servants, and maybe he did pay them, but like there's still a class system there, bud.
And that's what I'd like to introduce with her character more is less of this like, oh, Tarzan, like in her whole world revolving around Tarzan, but her also questioning, like, I think one of the reasons why she would have actually left Africa to begin with was because she realized her own level of responsibility.
Stability.
And like question the idea of like, am I actually helping by being here? Like, am I actually is this a place where I'm actually making a difference? Because I think
I totally see where you're coming from. Yeah.
So to actually have her also wrestling with the same questions as well, because then they both have an arc, and then it's also about their relationship too. While they both ask those questions, their relationship is
they have two individual arcs and stories that are separate from each other, but are connected for the overall theme of the movie.
Exactly, and I felt like that's what was important. Missing in the first movie is their relationship is like it goes unquestioned throughout it, and I felt like to really work as a movie, that the one thing that sort of keeps him, like that's his reason to exist, has to be challenged. And by him,
I also really like that because for me, Jane is actually, I think, the worst character, and by worst I mean most disappointing, because Margot Robbie is an exceptional actress.
Yeah, she is,
and she often pulls off like badass female characters, which I think is dope. And she often does them in very subtle ways, or over the top, like whichever works, depending on what she's being called upon for. But in this movie, it feels like they were like, oh, let's write a movie where Jane is, an independent woman who has her own story and conflict, and then they didn't.
Yeah.
Like they didn't do that. Like it falls so flat where like it's literally she's a damsel in distress. Me Jane, you Tarzan. Or sorry, me Tarzan, you Jane. He'll come for her, right? And it's just like fine, I guess, but like what does Jane do?
Exactly. And it's just taken for granted, right? And I think it would be more interesting, and the other thing I'd want to introduce in mine is like she could just go back, right? Like she doesn't like there's this idea in the movie as it currently is her world revolves around him. And the thing is,
she waits for him. Yeah. She's like, "Oh, I miss Africa so much." And he's like, "Well, I'm not inviting you." And like, if you missed Africa so much, why didn't you just go back?
Yeah, exactly. And so,
like, what's holding you? Like, to me it seemed like Tarzan didn't want to go back for whatever reason, because he's like, I'm John, I'm not Tarzan, right? My name is John. And so it seems to me like he didn't want to go back because he felt like he'd left that behind. And so she didn't want to go back, but in actuality, she did want to go back.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
like, I don't know.
And so, in my version, he wants to go back, and she maybe wants to go back too. But is also going. Is it actually a good time to go back? Is that even a responsible thing to do? And then he goes, basically lying to her, and now she's in this position where she's going, okay, wait a minute, my husband just lied to me. He's gone. I mean, what am I going to do? Okay, well,
Yeah.
I guess. And then, then she goes to go meet him and say, hey, what's going on? And then actually at that moment where he says, actually, I think this is my family, open the door, where she's going, actually, maybe this is the end. Maybe I am going to go back. And
maybe this isn't where I belong.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Like I know you said you left it open, but like, which one would you pick?
For which?
Would they go back or would they stay?
I think they would go back, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe it's just I'm reacting to the movie. I just felt in the end of the movie where they're like, oh, they've embraced the whole. It's like, oh, they've embraced living naturally. It's just the way it just.
And they have a baby now.
Yeah,
and they're part of.
I just thought, oh man, it's just. There's no words for the bad taste it left in my mouth. I guess it just seems like such a Hollywood cliche where it's like, oh, city bad but nature good, and that's
it's interesting. Have you ever read Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness?
I have. That was another thing that was another rabbit hole I was about to go down, because it was actually some of the expeditions with that one person who I mentioned was possibly the basis of inspiration for the Heart of Darkness.
Yeah, I felt like this movie easily could have been like a reaction and or retelling of like Tarzan in Heart of Darkness.
Right. Oh, interesting.
Because like they clearly show the Congo and then they show Tarzan, and I was like, oh fuck, are we gonna do a Heart of Darkness thing?
Right.
And then they don't.
Right. Yeah. Well, Heart of Darkness is all about this guy who's basically observing this just insanity and trying to figure it out and trying to go, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? Whereas
going on? Yeah.
In Tarzan, it's like he's just too okay with everything. Or
he has no character.
Yeah, exactly. It's just flat. Well, and the other thing too, I remember there was one shot I remember very specifically, and it's a quick cut to him. They show up, they get back to Africa, and he's like walking into a house, and she's happy, and he just looks sad. And I remember looking at that shot, going, "Why are you so sad, Tarzan? Like, why so sad, Tarzan? Because you're now back. You should be happy."
Why Tarzan sad?
Why Tarzan sad? But he's always. It's just always ambiguous as to how he's feeling.
Yeah.
And you're going, but there's no vulnerability. There's no weakness. It's just the Skarsgård 8-pack.
Why Tarzan sad?
Yeah, there we go. The Skarsgård.
He is very attractive, I will say. He is
that guy
very attractive in this movie.
Spent some time in the gym, and that's just what we're going to showcase.
It's very okay with that.
I mean, there's a better story. It lacks.
Yeah. Also that. Sorry, I got overwhelmed by his dreamy abs. Anyway,
I'm jealous of that 8-pack.
Yeah, I don't have.
I got that. I've got that gut going. Yeah.
Yeah, I got that dad bod.
Yeah, that sexy dad bod.
Yeah,
I'm working.
All right, I'm gonna get into mine then.
All right.
So mine, I just want to get this right out of the bat. Well, maybe I'll save it as a twist because we'll see how you react to it. So here we go. So we're introduced to, we get the same script at the beginning, the Belgian colonialism of the Congo. And so this time we don't have Mbongo, that whole thing. We just have Rom. I can't remember the actor's name. What's his name? Monsieur Rom?
Christoph Waltz?
Christoph Waltz. So we have Christoph Rom's character, Monsieur Rom, and he's the villain, but he doesn't have the stupid cross because that's dumb.
Yeah,
like the cross weapon, that was so stupid. So he still has a cross. He's very like religious, very Catholic,
right.
But it's more of a symbol of his Catholicism. So he's a villain not because he's, and I'm just going to say it. Normally you'd show it, but I'm going to say it because we're pitching.
Right.
He's the villain not because he's like got a stupid weapon. He's a villain because he's a shrewd businessman. Right, so we see the way he like does business, and he truly believes that what he's doing is good for business and for his religion. Like, he's very religious.
Okay.
He's like, oh no, I'm doing this. I'm doing colonialism because I'm bringing business. I'm making money, but also because it's we're bringing religion to the savages, right? That kind of thing.
Right.
We're bringing them out of savagery into the new world. I'm I'm also going to do a lot of playing with racism and classism.
Okay, interesting.
So, Tarzan is then introduced the same way, except he's black.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So Tarzan, now we get Tarzan, and he's in England. He got a job working in the Greystoke house because what happened, and we see this all through flashback. Now the flashbacks make sense. What happened is when Tarzan was young, not like a child. When Tarzan was young, the ship that he was. So the current Lord Greystoke, his father got shipwrecked off the coast of Africa, and Tarzan, whose name is John, actually. John and his parents wind up getting shipwrecked, and everybody died, but Tarzan survived. So I'm thinking he's probably like 12 at this point.
Okay.
And so he got shipwrecked, and he spent the next, I don't know, let's say 15 years learning how to survive in the jungle on his own, until eventually he was found by a group of tribesmen who then like took him in, and like so he like worked his way and then finally made his way back to England. And now he works for the new Lord Greystoke, who is the original Lord's son. He works for that Lord Greystoke because, you know, the Lord was like, "Oh my God, you survived, and the only reason you were there was because of my father. So yeah, of course you can have a job." So now he has a job. While he was there, he did also meet Jane, but Jane is white.
Okay.
While he was in Africa, Jane was white, and her parents were teaching English, basically as a form of colonialization. Right, trying to teach English, but like, so Jane is white, and so the two of them did fall in love, and we can show them falling in love, but now that they're both back in England, they cannot be together.
Oh.
They cannot be together. So Jane is a tutor, and because she's a woman, she can't teach like regularly, so she's just to teach as a tutor. She teaches the Greystoke children as a working woman, because she wants to be a working woman, because she's dope and badass that way, and doesn't just want to get married. So we see how they all met. And pardon?
I said, "Way to go, Jane."
Yeah. So in my version, we also hear like the legend of Tarzan is a thing. Like people are like, "Oh, he can talk to animals," but I wanted to play with the whole idea that he is an African American. He's a black man, and so instead of being like, "Oh, he's Tarzan of the apes," they call him the Animal Man. They call him Tarzan the Animal Man, because I just think like how would white people in England think about the legend of Tarzan if he was African American?
Right.
How would they think, like, instead of being like this noble gorilla man, it would be like, no, he's an animal, like he's dirty and an animal, the same way that they used to think about animals during that time, right?
Right.
And I also want to at this point in time, like at the beginning of the movie, I want to highlight the classism between white Lord Greystoke, who's not Tarzan now, but white Lord Greystokes, versus white woman Jane versus black servant John Clayton, we know him as Tarzan. Mm-hmm. Right? And how there's like this structure that way. But also I do want to show at one point in time how like Jane, I don't know, whatever. There's a scene at the zoo, I don't know how it would happen, where maybe she takes the kids to the zoo to teach them about animals that she taught about in Africa. And we see the animals caged up in the zoo, and just plant that in your head. So then Samuel L. Jackson can still be George Washington Williams, and he's got a plan. He's like, something fishy is going on in the Congo. I want to figure out what it is, but I need Tarzan on my side. But he can't get Tarzan because Tarzan works in a household, right? So he's like, Tarzan's like, well, I got to make money. I can't just get up and leave. I'll lose my job. And so George Washington Williams comes up with a way. He's going to say, okay, King Leopold wants to buy out the Congo. The reason that the elder Lord Greystokes got shipwrecked is because he was on his way to the Congo, because the Greystokes own land in the Congo. Right?
Okay.
So now what's going to happen is King Leopold is going to... or George Washington Williams is basically like, I'm going to convince John Clayton to sell his land to King Leopold, back to the crown.
Right.
Or at least to the crown of Belgium. Not back to the crown, but to the crown of Belgium. And he does this when he's like, oh, I need you to basically go. And so Lord Greystokes is like, that's fine, cool, we'll make it a vacation. And he basically like forces Jane, who's the tutor, and Tarzan to like go with him because he can just do that.
Okay.
Because he's got that kind of money, right? So he's just like, oh, we're going to have a family vacation and we'll go for 6 months and I'll deal with the business of selling the land and the kids will have a tutor to come along with us because I can just afford to do that. And Tarzan, you remember, you grew up in the Congo. Wouldn't you like to go back? Also, you're my manservant and you don't have a choice.
Right. Okay, interesting.
So then what happens is, so George Washington Williams convinced that to happen. So once they're in the Congo, Lord Greystokes is like, fine, I'll look after my land. And Tarzan is like, well, John, because he's not Tarzan. John Clayton is like, cool, can I leave so I can go see the people who I grew up with? And Lord Greystokes is like, sure, you can have this many days, but you're not getting paid for them because you're away from work.
It's sort of like and that scene in Color Purple.
Yeah. And because he's like, I'm a benevolent, like, servant owner. I pay you, but, of course you can have time off, but of course you don't get paid for that time off.
Right.
Even though I'm the one who brought you here.
Right.
Like, just show the sort of, like, blatant kind of undercurrent
racism
where he's like, he thinks he's being benevolent, but he's really just part of the problem.
Right.
And he's not a bad guy. Like, the point isn't that he's a bad dude.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was just how people saw it at a time. Yeah.
So he thinks he's being this dope guy. So anyway, so George Washington Williams and John Clayton are like, oh, we're gonna go and visit the natives that I know that John Clayton knows. And George Washington Williams is like, yes, that's perfect. Like, we can go and talk to the natives, and you can help me, and we can figure out, what's going on with all these slaves. And Jane is like, oh, I taught some of these tribes people English. Can I go as well? But of course, she's an unmarried female, so she can't go unchaperoned into the jungle because that's not allowed. But she does it anyway because she's dope. Even though she might lose her job, because she's like, well, this is dumb. I'm going to go back there. And so the three of them now go off, and they realize that people are disappearing from the village. They've been taking slaves and the business that drives it. So the story isn't really about slavery, but it's also about slavery.
Okay, got it.
It's more about like the business of colonialism and the classism.
Got it.
With slavery is still part of it, but it's not
right.
It is, but it isn't, if you know what I mean. So for the rest of the movie, instead of chasing Jane and trying to rescue her, it's basically they're trying to discover what Rom's plan is and how he's like a shrewd, like they can't attack him on a business front, so they basically have to like figure out what his plan is and stop him. And Rom is much more sinister because the way that he like plans things, like he's not sinister because he's like has a stupid cross thing. He's sinister because it's like, how can you stop me? You are literally like three people and some tribesmen.
Right.
You can't stop me. And also, I'm a rich white landowner, and you are a white woman, a black American, and a black servant from England. What are you going to do?
Right.
You don't have any power. You don't have any land. You don't have any status. You don't have any money. And so it becomes less of like we can defeat him, and more of like well, what do we do? What, like, he literally has all the cards and we have nothing. But then I think we do some more like crazy stuff, like animal stuff. But in this version, my version, the legend of Tarzan has become ubiquitous. Like, everybody knows the legend of Tarzan, but none of it's true.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Like, he doesn't.
Interesting.
So people think he can talk to animals and like crawled on all fours and can like swing from vines and but what it turns out is that he did survive in the jungle for a long time on his own. But he's more of like a naturalist or a survivalist. Like, so he watches animals that he's seen, that he knows. He can be like, oh, that is the mating cry, but he can't like reproduce it. And he's not like super powered strong. He's just like a dude who spent a lot of time in the jungle. So like, when he sees like gorillas, he's like, oh, this is their behavior, or this is how we get out of the situation, or we need to be careful. But like, he wasn't raised by gorillas or anything like that.
Right. Okay.
So I do think there would be this really, really cool scene if like Tarzan convinces Rom that he can talk to animals, or like because people think he can, and so he like convinces him that's going to happen, and he like tricks him. So it turns out that he couldn't talk to animals, and so George Washington Williams is like, "Oh my God, you can do that? You can make the alligators show up?" And he's like, "No, of course not. I can't talk to alligators. That's ridiculous." But he believed that I could.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Right? They believe the legend of Tarzan, and sometimes that's more powerful than what it was actually what happened. And so in the end, I would actually have Rom win. So Rom manages to tie Tarzan down. And he's like claiming like basically like, I would also have a scene where when they finally see the slaves, it basically looks like the animals in the zoo.
Oh, okay. To mirror that.
Yeah,
right,
to
right.
mirror that. And so Rom ties Tarzan down, and he basically calls him an animal. He's like, you're dirty, you're just like all the other black people, except I would use the N-word because it's era appropriate, but I'm not going to say it right now because it's not appropriate ever. But like basically, and be like, you're just a dirty animal man, you're not real, you're Tarzan the animal man. You're just like dirty like all the other animals, just like all the other N-words. But it turns out that the reason that like Rom wins is, and it's not a like a 1-to-1 combat. Like Rom would obviously have people working for him, but he finally like hog ties him down, basically like what they did at the beginning of the movie, where they like hog tied him to basically look like a pig that's been strung up. Because I think that imagery works really, really well, and also because there's like a lot of implications about how African American people were treated and roped up like that in America. But really, this was all a distraction so that George Washington Williams could get the information back to Belgium to bring all this bad shit to light.
Okay.
So in the end, they basically get the letter to the government, and everyone is like, well, wait a second, you can't just do slavery.
Right.
And so then Tarzan and Jane could essentially be together or whatever, but that's not really the point. The point is that they managed to defeat Rom by getting information and bringing it back to the government.
Okay.
And doing journalism instead of like, actually fighting
Slow
him. They're
motion
like, well, if we
punches in
can,
the face.
yeah. Instead, it's more about like Tarzan actually loses to Rom, to Rom's plan, but overall he manages to let George Washington Williams get information that so they win through journalism,
Right.
which sounds boring, but is in fact, I think, a better win than blowing up a boat
Yeah.
and throwing diamonds into a river and then calling alligators.
Yeah.
And also having his like stupid cross thing blow up just because Tarzan has strong neck muscles.
That was hilarious. I cracked up when that happened. Yeah. That was
Anyway,
that gave me a good laugh.
The real theme of mine is like trying to deal with like the imagery of slavery, the imagery of how basically the classist situation of like Lord Greystokes, who's not an important character really, but also is like Lord Greystokes is like Rom and Greystokes are supposed to be like two sides of the same coin, where like Lord Greystokes was born into money, where Rom's made his way through it and like believes what he's doing is for the good of the Congolese people, because he's bringing them into civilization and teaching them religion and business. But Greystokes thinks he's doing the right thing as well. He's just less of a douchebag about it. So then we have like sort of them at the top, and then we have Jane, who is, I want to do a little bit more to show like what exactly can women get away with at the time. Like there's a class structure here, if you're a wealthy white man versus wealthy white woman, and we could show Jane being well off but still working, right? Like she doesn't want to marry, so that means she has to get by somehow. And it's only the 1880s, so like it's not like women had a lot of options back then. Even then, and then we have your working average African American, or not I guess African American, but African English black servant trying to get by. Anyway, that's basically what I want to do with mine. I think there's a way more interesting story to basically be like instead of Tarzan being this idealized white wild man, what if he was black? Because I do actually think one of the things that I was getting a little meta about this, what if I like straight up just said this movie's getting made, and then I said, oh, we've hired so and so to be Tarzan, and everyone who's not on board with it would be like, oh my god, why is Tarzan black? And it's like, that's the point of the movie. Do you know what I mean? Like that's literally the point of the movie. The point of the movie is that he, like everyone would be like, Tarzan's not black, he's white, and it's like, yeah, that's the point of the movie. What would it be like if Tarzan was white, was black? Think about that.
And just the implications in terms of how the rest of the characters in that world,
how people would view him.
Right. Interesting.
Right? Because then it gets meta. It gets a little bit more meta, because then the world inside the movie views him that way, but then the world outside the movie, like the actual world, is also going to be like, what is it like if Tarzan was black? Some people are going to hate it because they're going to be like, Well, some people are always just like, why is this character being recast? Why are they a different race? Because it's interesting to like talk about that. It's interesting to be like, hey, how do things change based on how we view people based on color? Because no matter what you say, it changes things, and that's worth looking at.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Yeah, because I was thinking something similar for my pitch, and I decided not to go there for the reason that you mentioned. And because I went, well, what are you then saying if you actually do say this man who grew up in the jungle, if that's the color of his skin, how would that actually be perceived? And what would you be insinuating? And I do think there's a way to do it where you can be responsible about it, and you can actually be putting a mirror up to think.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to do because I can guarantee as soon as I said like, oh, we're gonna get, I don't know, I would want Michael B. Jordan because I really like Michael B. Jordan as an actor.
He's fantastic.
Yeah. So I would be like, I want Michael B. Jordan to play Tarzan, right?
Oh, okay.
And then everyone would be like, well, why are you getting Michael B. Jordan to play Tarzan? And I'd be like, because he's a fantastic actor, and also because I want to explore what it means to say, this wild man is actually African American. How is that going to change the way the world in the book looks at African American and Tarzan? And how is that going to change the way the world outside the movie and the book looks at African Americans and Tarzan?
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
Because I thought about that too. I was like, oh, what are the implications be saying like a wild man from Africa who happens to be African? Like that does sound like, oh, like, but I think we already like legendize Tarzan for being this like noble white wild savage man, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, so
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I think there's a story to be told there if you say like, well, what if he was black? He wouldn't be a landowner. He wouldn't be anything special. He would literally be like a zoo oddity.
Just in society.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, there is a parallel. There is just historically speaking, there's a parallel in terms of the way of societal perceptions.
Exactly. Like, and I made my Tarzan and my pitch more realistic because I wanted to. Mm-hmm. But like, we could even be like, well, if he still had all those animal powers and he was super strong, society would still view him as like, oh, the reason he's like that is because he's more tribal, he's more animalistic, simply because of the color of his skin.
And that's how the characters in the film would, and that would be another way and thing that he would have to then fight against.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why he would want to like leave the jungle behind. He'd be like, no, like my name is John Clayton. My name is not Tarzan. I'm not the wild man.
Right. So then that gives his character something that he's actually gives him a goal of that he's working towards in terms of proving his own dignity, I suppose. Yeah,
and that's why I just wanted him to be an actual person, because I think the legend actually does him detriment if he's African. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, okay. I see.
That's why I made the legend of Tarzan is its own thing. People think he can talk to animals. People think he walks around on all fours. Right? When we view that legend through the scope of white privilege, then we see like, oh wow, he can talk to animals, and he did walk around on all fours and was raised by gorillas. But if we view that through the lens of race, then it becomes dirty. He wants to distance himself from the legend of Tarzan because none of that was true in my version, right? None of that was true. He just lived in the jungle for like 15 years and survived, right? So already he's dealing with his own hardship. Like I survived for 15 years off my own wits, and I learned, how to survive in the jungle, and I met these, finally many years later I met actual people and could deal with that. But I want to distance myself from that because, like, I'm not the animal man. I'm not Tarzan the animal man. I'm John Clayton. I had an identity before. I have an identity after. And it's not some kind of sideshow.
Right. Well, that's an interesting way to sort of get around, because as you were talking, I was thinking about how in the original source material, and you mentioned this too, how it's deeply problematic just in terms of what's there. And I think that was a challenge that I came up against too in writing my pitch, is how do you how do you address those things? And I'll be honest, I don't know if I really did, because it's still it still does become like the two central characters are, in my version, they were white. But I do think you could. I mean, Jane doesn't have to be. I mean, you could switch that out.
Yeah.
Like it's. I do think there is.
I wanted Jane to be white. Sorry for interrupting, but I wanted Jane to be white because I thought the dynamic between an African man and a white woman, like a white American or white English woman, would be interesting. Because societally they would be like, no, you can't be together,
right? Even
though we can, and then the relationship doesn't become like a what kind of dynamic, or why are they arguing with each other? Like, why aren't they getting along? It literally becomes they want to be together,
right?
But they cannot,
right? And that actually puts more attention in their relationship too, which the original movie lacked.
Yeah,
it makes it
and that's what I think would work. Is like, so now whenever we do those flashbacks, it becomes like they want to be together, they're attracted to each other, and we don't even need to explicitly say it. We can just show this all through acting, through cinematography. Like, they want to be together.
Yeah, well,
and everyone knows that Jane and Tarzan want to be together.
Yeah, well, I think an audience would be
you can play that
smart enough to know, just if you show these two characters in this time and place, and you show enough to give the sense that there's this sort of mutual feeling. People will figure out, like, oh, okay, well, just it doesn't take a dummy to know that at this time in history there were certain relationships that were taboo.
Yeah, and I think playing that up would be excellent, because when I in my version they would stay in Africa, and I think you could get away with showing them being together because there are less social taboos around it.
Yeah.
Or just, fuck society.
Fuck society.
Fuck society. Anyway, super racially charged episode of CineMasters.
Yeah, it was a tough one. I mean, I'll admit, I wasn't super thrilled with my pitch, but I do think I was able to at least kind of get around some of the, just in terms of story, and just the
story,
biggest thing that to me was lacking was an emotional arc for the main character.
Yeah.
That was really the biggest thing that I think it needed.
I think maybe I definitely didn't play it safe. Like, I basically was like, no, I'm going to take a bite out of my attempt at trying to deal with, and not even like fix, because that's too big of a word, but try and deal with racism in the story of Tarzan.
Right, yeah. Well, you took a big swing.
And I mean, I took a big swing, and I don't know if it worked at all. I tried something, and to hold up a mirror to society and literally be like, well, what if? And I don't know. I mean, it was a big risk, and I also just want to throw it out there like I'm a white male, and obviously if I was going to do this, I would be like, here's my pitch. Somebody else write it.
Right. Yeah. Oh, of course.
Like, somebody else write and direct this.
Right.
And like, just 'cause that's just my idea. It's like, what if?
Right, yeah. Well, that's what this show is about, is asking that question of like, what would this movie be like if it, and I think we should be able to go to say, well, if we were looking at this theme in the context of this IP, how could you approach it in a way that's responsible?
Responsible, yeah. Because I do think that the studio clearly tried to do something with this.
I get that sense,
again, with dealing with... I get the sense, and I just feel like, I mean, my biggest issue is the three big characters are all white. Mm-hmm. And I honestly, to me, it just feels like, well, why wouldn't you, because there's a story to be told there, why wouldn't you just tell the story of George Washington Williams, Dr. George Washington Williams, without Tarzan?
Well, that's a fair point.
Already sounds like an interesting story.
Yeah, it does. I mean, that's the thing. So many of those people in history in that time, there is a lot there actually already that exists that on their own could be far more interesting stories.
That's a story of an African American gentleman who did the Civil War, coming over and doing more for people of his skin color, doing more, because he's a well-educated man. He uses that privilege to do more for the Congolese people. Like fuck yeah, man! I want to see that movie. And I almost feel like it's an appropriation to have a white colonialist era superhero, quote unquote, or at least Ubermensch, written into the story of Dr. George Washington Williams.
Right. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Like, it's a bit of an appropriation of African American and Congolese history.
Yeah, and that's again going back to what sort of at the heart of the original source material. It's a really weird thing to try to address. To be honest, like if let's say, just speculatively, if this was something was like, oh hey, here's this Tarzan movie, is it something you'd be interested in doing? I'd probably just be like, nope, just I'm not going there.
I do think it depends. If somebody were to come to me and be like, hey Andrew, we want you to direct this movie, and I was like, okay, I think it would depend on context, because I think it would really, for me, it would be like, okay, how much power over script do I have? Second of all, where am I coming at with this in my career? Is this my first big movie? Because then I would probably be like, no.
Yeah.
Like, first of all, I'm not going to handle Tarzan as an IP, because that's huge. Like, everybody knows Tarzan.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, I'm not going to handle this movie because there's way too much going on there. I think you're right. Like, in terms of, like, as a director, like, if somebody just handed me the script of the movie we got, not either of our pitches, the script of the movie we got, and be like, do you want to direct this? I'd probably be like, no.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even...
And not because it's a terrible movie.
Well, and even like, oh, hey, we want someone who could develop a story for it. I would probably even just be... I would be hesitant, because I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It's just that... I would feel like I don't know if there's anything I really have that could, in my own experience... I mean, you even bring up a good point.
That's even bringing up a good point there. Do we really need to do Tarzan again?
Well, I mean, that's a fair... Like, exactly. It's like... I don't know what their intention was with it, but if it was to sort of correct the shortcomings of what would have been in the original source material, I don't think they succeeded.
I don't, but that's what I'm saying. Like, why do we need to do Tarzan again?
No.
We're living in a day and age where like the jungles of Africa used to be seen as like this wild sort of place where, you know, there wasn't any civilization and animals of strange animals roamed, and it's like, why don't we just do that with space now?
Right. Well, yeah, exactly.
Like, why don't we just do Space Tarzan? Like, obviously not Tarzan, but you know what I mean? Like the jungle isn't this scary place anymore. It's a place where people live. It's like, let's do that. Let's do sci-fi. Let's do, like, does Tarzan need to be done anymore? No,
I don't think so.
If you go back and read it and understand it for what it is, sure, it's a fantastic piece of literature for the time, if you take it with a grain of salt and everything that it comes with. Do we need to redo it and correct it? I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There are other movies with better ideas that we could be spending our time on.
Yeah, and admittedly, part of my own... Sometimes I get frustrated watching these movies, because I'm like, they put lots of money into it, and what about the poor suckers like me, where it's like, I just need $25,000.
$5,000.
Yeah, it's more like $25,000. But I'm just trying to.
I mean, that's a fraction of budget.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking, like, all we need is like $5,000, and then you could at least have like good audio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a little more
like,
than that.
Gives
but
a little bit more than that. But my point remains is, like, a fraction of your budget, and I could make my movie sound or look that much better.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and yet here you are spending millions of dollars on this movie, which is garbage.
Yeah.
Thematically and narratively.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all I got to say about that.
That's in the words of Forrest Gump, that's about all I have to say about that.
Yeah, that's all there is. Where can people find you on the internet?
My website, nathanieldraper.com. Twitter,
nice.
Nate Draper. Instagram, Draper Nate. Letterboxd, Draper Nate.
Oh yeah, you're doing the letterbox thing. So if you want to hear Nate's opinion on movies that we don't do on CineMasters, or movies that we do, if you're like, oh, they're doing this movie, I wonder what Nate's opinions are in 140 characters or less.
To be honest, since we last recorded, I haven't logged them yet, but I've only watched 2 movies, because I'm going to log them today, but the only other, because I've been watching a lot of TV recently, Letterboxd is really specific to movies.
To movies. Oh. Well, either way, people might be watching out of order, so they might want to see what else we got.
True.
Yeah. On my end, you can check out my other podcast where I talk about music and the crazy phenomena and genres that go on with music. It's called Audio Mind, because if you listen to it, you must be audio mind. And other than that, you can check out my band Robot Philosopher on Facebook and YouTube and Spotify and wherever you listen to fine music goods. Any last minute thoughts?
Yeah. Don't freak out during this outbreak. Be safe.
Yeah.
Don't be an idiot. But don't
be an
lose
idiot.
your shit and buy a bunch of toilet paper.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Nate's referring to the COVID-19
Yeah.
outbreak and quarantine that's going on right now. But yeah, don't lose your shit. And with that, we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Peace out.
Yeah. See you later.